First of all, thank you very much that I can be here. Thank you for the invitation. And it's a very good, not actually start, but it's really in the beginning of my work here in Israel that I can be here. I came here in June this year to be representative of a Center of Israel Studies. It's not directly my church. My church is one of the participants in this center. Another participant is a school, a university for applied sciences, the Christian high school, but it's university, I think, in Ede. And there's also an organization in the biggest church in the Netherlands, the Protestant Church Netherlands, the GZB, which also is a participant. So I'm not only on behalf of one church, but also of more. To tell something about myself, as others did, I came here in the year 1976 for the first time. It was wonderful to me that I could make a trip. It was after my first year of studying theology, and this changed my study and my life, because I had learned some Hebrew. But when I was in the synagogue in Israel, I was around to envy, you could say, by a little boy who read the texts much better than I could. So, you know, we as Christians have to arouse Jewish people to envy, but I was aroused to envy by this little boy. And I thought I had seen how wonderful it is to read the scriptures in Hebrew, and I thought I only can spell them. So from then on, I focused on Hebrew, but also on topics of Israel, Judaism in my study, and later on in my life. I was a pastor for several years in different congregations. And in that time, I was about 16 years a member of the board for Church in Israel, the Christian Reformed churches. I have written something about those churches. It's a minor church in the Netherlands, but always with a special love to Israel. And there have been several people from our churches in Israel as a representative. The last was until the year 2000, and after him, our churches became a participant of the Center for Israel Studies. So there was Kees-Jan Rodenburg as my predecessor, also on behalf of the Christian Reformed churches, but also of the whole Center of Israel Studies. The Center of Israel Studies, I told something about it, is now 10 years old. It was founded because several partners thought it's very important for us as Christians to be in contact with Israel and with Jewish people. We have so much in common in the scriptures, in the psalms that we sing and we pray. And we can learn, we have to learn so much from Israel in their way of reading the scriptures and living the scriptures. And the first word that is very important for the Center of Israel Studies is listening. Listening to the scriptures together with Jewish people, listening to their exegesis of scriptures. But it's also important, very important, to listen to their stories, to the history full of terrible things. We want to be open to people in Israel, to have a real meeting, to learn. We are also, the second word that's important for the Center of Israel Studies is we are also to serve, to help people. There's also a diaconical consultant who is here, but not lives in Israel, but on a regular basis come to Israel, and we try to help people, and one of the projects is we help children to get good food on their schools. The third word is we want to witness, to be open also about what we believe about Jesus. But in this way, when there is a good occasion and there is openness, there can be a good dialogue. And this is what we want to have, a real meeting with Israel. Something about the Center of Israel Studies. I can show you 3 books that were published by the center. The first is Israel, Volk, Land en Staat. Israel, People, Land and State. It's looking back and looking forward. Looking back to how in the Dutch Reformed Church there was written a statement about Israel, Volk, People, Land and State. Rather long ago, and things have changed in the churches in the meantime, but we thought it's important to look back to this original statement and to show how important it still is. Another thing is the book Hope for Israel. It's about the book of Acts and about how in this book it's not only about the Goyim, the peoples of the world, but we see a very specific role in the present of Acts, but also for the future in the book of Acts. Another thing which shows what we want to do as Center for Israel Studies is this book, Be Holy. It's written, part of it by Christian theologians, part of it by Jewish theologians, rabbis and others. And this is exactly what we want and what we think is very important to come in contact with Jewish people. Why is this very important? Well, I don't have to tell it here, but I can say about the Netherlands, and perhaps Henk will tell more about it. After a history in which the Netherlands were seen as good friends of Israel, and in a way were, I see more and more that many people in the Netherlands are friends of Palestinians. Also at this moment there are a lot of friends of Israel, but it's more and more difficult to show the truth, to tell the truth about Israel and about how important Israel still is for us as Christians. So this is what we are involved in. I wrote also something about the Protestant Church in the Netherlands. I think I can leave this domain for Henk.
Thank you.
Because you can read this and hear Henk. Thank you very much.